Welcome everybody to a new episode of Wartime Cafe. We are in Barzakh on Hamra Street, and we have with us a special guest visiting Lebanon, Craig Moray, human rights activist and former ambassador of the UK to Uzbekistan. Thank you for being with us. Welcome to Lebanon, the land of the free.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me and to such a nice location.
So, Craig, our audience always likes to know the background of our guests. You are obviously one of the big names working on human rights and specifically on the foreign policy of the UK and its effects on human rights on the globe. And you have your fame and name inside the UK. But to our global audience, we would like to kind of give them the background of how you got to your campaigning at this moment. And of course, seems like one of the stepping stones to this was the time you spent as an ambassador of the UK in Uzbekistan between 2002 and 2004. Your attention to how the UK was using the Uzbeki intelligence forces to extract confessions under torture of quote-unquote terrorism. And that's where, at the time of this September 11, 2001 and after that. Can we talk about your time as an ambassador in Uzbekistan and how that, experience led you to the change in coming out of government into where you are now?
Yeah. I was a career diplomat for 22 years. I was appointed as ambassador to Uzbekistan in 2001. I took up a post in 2002. And Uzbekistan was quite important to the UK at that time because the UK, of course, had invaded Afghanistan along with the Americans and others. Uzbekistan borders Afghanistan. The Germans and the Americans both had military air bases in Uzbekistan, which were supplying forces. And the governments, particularly the American government, were giving quite a lot of money to the Uzbek government in order to be able to maintain their military presence there. And as you said, what I discovered was that the Uzbek regime, which at that time was a terrible regime, I mean, it was a really dreadful dictatorship, it was torturing people on a massive scale. And it was practicing severe torture, in many cases resulting in death, on about 10,000 people a year. That was the kind of scale of it. And I discovered that British and American intelligence, mostly the CIA, were cooperating in the torture with the Uzbek government in order to get people to confess to membership of al-Qaeda. And most of these people had no connection whatsoever to al-Qaeda, absolutely none. These were forced confessions. And the extraordinary thing is that the Western powers wanted these confessions because they wanted to build this false image of Central Asia being full of al-Qaeda in order to justify maintaining troops there, maintaining bases there. And the plan was, of course, to get access to Central Asia's oil and gas, because nearly all these Western maneuvers end up being about oil and gas in the end. And Central Asia is very rich in oil and gas, which was under effectively Russian control largely, or was being routed to Russia. And they wanted to change that. And their narrative, their excuse for going in was to build up this picture of al-Qaeda activity in the country, which was completely false, and which was a picture built up by intelligence from torturing people.
So this was at the time when there was all these black sites that the CIA and the MI6 and others were torturing people in. There was, of course, thousands of people, as you said, that perished in these under these torture regimes, and more than a decade or two of American occupation didn't lead to America controlling the region. And we can almost see the only effect in the home in the UK and the US, where those anti-terrorism laws have carried over to allow today the imprisonment and harassment of anyone that the state considers to be opposition to it. How do you feel those laws that came in 2001 are affecting us today in the UK and the US and other places like that?
Yeah, no, the situation is extremely bad. I resigned as ambassador over the extraordinary rendition program, flying people about, use of black sites, as you say. I believe I'm right in saying I was the very first person in the world who blew the whistle on it. It wasn't known until I blew the whistle on it. And then subsequently I campaigned, particularly alongside WikiLeaks, on revealing information about government war crimes in the West. And I've always supported Palestine. I think, for me, it's very, very important that people understand that the genocide in Palestine started 76 years ago. It didn't start on the 8th of October. So, and I now find myself, as you say, running foul of the anti-terror laws that were passed in that time of the so-called war on terror, which are now being used against Palestinian activists. And in particular, the Terrorism Act in the UK makes it illegal to express support, to express an opinion in support of a terrorist organization. And a terrorist organization is who the government says is a terrorist organization. And it doesn't even have to be an opinion in support of a terrorist organization. Any opinion which may cause somebody else to support a terrorist organization. And the government has, under heavy pressure from the Zionist lobby, the government decided that all of Hamas and all of Hezbollah, all of those structures are terrorist organizations. So, for example, a Hamas-run hospital or a Hezbollah-run hospital is a terrorist organization in UK law. And if I say, well, actually, Hezbollah ran this hospital and it's a pretty good hospital, I could be jailed for that. You can get a sentence. And this is a sentence of 14 years in prison. This is not a fine or 6 months in the jail. It's up to 14 years for expressing an opinion in support of terrorist organizations. And of course, what happened, of course, is the Zionist lobby used its influence to get all the opposition to the ongoing genocide of the Palestinians labeled as terrorist organizations. So the situation is this now. It is perfectly legal. I can stand in front of Parliament in the UK and say, I support the genocide. I believe Israel should kill all Palestinians. I support the IDF. I can stand in front of Parliament and say that, and I'm not breaking any law at all. If I stand in front of Parliament and say, I support the Palestinian right in international law of armed resistance, I can be jailed for 14 years. And they are using these powers against journalists in particular. And some of the UK's very best journalists, people like Asa Winstanley, Richard Medhurst, Sarah Wilkinson, they've all been arrested recently and had their materials confiscated, had their laptops and phones and everything seized, so the security services can see all their Palestinian contacts. And it also happened to me. I was arrested or detained about a year ago, and they took my phone, took my laptops, and questioned me. And this is legislation like from the worst dictatorship. If you're arrested or detained, it's called, under a Terrorism Act. It's called detained and not arrested because if you were arrested, you would be entitled to a lawyer. They call it detained, because if you're detained, you're not entitled to a lawyer. So you're not entitled to a lawyer. You do not have the right to remain silent. And if you remain silent, it can be 5 years in prison just for remaining silent. You must give full and complete answers to their questions, whatever those questions are. You must give up the passwords to all of your devices. And not doing that also carries up to 5 years in prison. So you have no rights at all if you are if they come and get you under this act. And we've had instances. Sarah Wilkinson, who I hope she wouldn't object to my saying she's not a young lady. She's getting a little older. She had 14 policemen at 6 a.m. smashing down her door. Some of them in balaclava helmets, in the dark, coming in. They turned over her house, they wrecked everything. They took her mother's ashes, which were in an urn, and they tipped out her mother's ashes on the floor. You know, this is Gestapo tactics, and it's being used now against anti-Palestinian activists all over the UK. And there are many cases. I mean, sadly, the Muslim community is used to this. These laws have been used to promote Islamophobia, and have been used by the police in an Islamophobic way for decades. They're now expanding its use to other journalists, including non-Muslim journalists, people like myself, who support Palestine. And it's a dreadful situation. I don't think it's entirely understood how difficult it is now getting for Palestinian supporters in the UK. And the same is true all over Europe. The same is true in France, the same is true in Germany, the same is true in the Netherlands. All over Europe, the same things are happening.
In 2003, when you started exposing how these anti-terrorism laws are being used to terrorize and torture citizens in Central Asia, and now these same laws are being used to terrorize and harass citizens of the UK. How was the reaction to you in 2003 within the establishment of the UK and the diplomatic corps once you outed the torture?
The establishment hate me. They view me as a traitor, basically. I gave evidence before a committee of the Council of Europe, Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. There was one Conservative MP who was a member of the committee. His name was Edward Lee, I think. And he stood up in the meeting and he said, "This man is a traitor. We should not allow people who are traitors to their country to give evidence before this committee," which I personally found quite amusing. But I will never be forgiven by the British establishment, at least by those in power in the British establishment. And of course, the Zionists particularly absolutely hate me. So my life has not been easy, to be frank. It's increasingly becoming hard to be a dissident in the UK, and it's getting harder and harder. There were I blew the whistle on CIA torture and extraordinary rendition in 2003, 2004. I formally left the diplomatic service in 2005. For about the next 10 years, I could get onto the BBC to give opinions. What BBC would invite me as a commentator, as an intellectual to discuss things. Then about 2015, it was stopped, and it stopped immediately. Obviously, an instruction went out because I went from actually, frankly, making my living writing for newspapers, writing for television, and one week, suddenly, everything I had coming was cancelled all at once. And I've never, ever been asked onto the BBC or asked to write for corporate media since that day. I've been blacklisted for work. But of course, that, in a way, that's good, because it made me forget the legacy media and go on to alternative media, which, as you know, is much more important. And it is a place where people realize now they will find the truth.
So the difference obviously being that a lot of people don't know that there's these blacklists on the mainstream media. And I've seen these lists on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, I've actually seen the blacklist that they have of names. And that's throughout the Western media is now a norm. And you talk about new social media and alternative media, and there is clearly the problem with the internet being controlled. Yes, there is an amazing number of alternative media sources and so forth, but from your experience, as we saw with when Alisher Asmarov bought that British soccer team, football team, and your information about his mafioso dealings made it to the media. We saw that under orders of the UK government, the whole internet record of what you published was erased. So we're now kind of almost hostage to internet providers and for even this alternative media. And we saw a couple of weeks ago the attacks on the archives.org, the erasure of all their records and so on. So how much should we be feeling worried about even this alternative media that we have today?
And it's extremely concerning. You know, about 15 or so years ago, at the time of the WikiLeaks revelations, for example, of all the files Chelsea Manning released, for example, it felt like we were in a new world where there was this new freedom, where citizens could get information, where blogs were starting up all over the place and they had big readerships and people could switch from one to the other, they supported each other. It felt like a new dawn was coming in the world. And gradually the billionaires and the states have gained control. Let me give you one example. I went to every single day of Julian Assange's trial hearings in the UK. His hearings started first in Woolwich Crown Court for 5 days in February. And I was writing a detailed report of every day. And my reports were being seen on my own website by 4 million people around the world. And they were being mirrored all around the world, where they were being seen by millions and millions more. After 5 days, the hearing stopped and then restarted again at the Old Bailey a few months later, maybe 4 or 5 months later. I started reporting again, and now instead of reaching 4 million people a day, my reports were reaching 4,000 people a day, because I'd put out, as I always did, my reports on Twitter and Facebook, which is how people found them, and Twitter and Facebook just blocked it completely. So nobody could see it, nobody knew these things existed, and you couldn't find them on Google. Google blocked it. So suddenly, from being a huge thing, enormously popular, read all around the world, it went to being something nobody could find. You could only find it. The only way to get it at all was to type in my website, which everybody should, craigmurray.org.uk. That was a good advertising opportunity. But craigmurray.org.uk, I'll do it again. The only way to get it was to type in the address direct. There's no other way to find it. And not many people do that, obviously, because they don't know there's anything to find particularly. And that gives some idea of the power of the corporate gatekeepers, how they can simply kill something completely. And since the Palestine question kicked off in such a big way a year ago, I've been suppressed even more on both Twitter and on Meta, all of those. So on the one hand, there appears to be, superficially, this great opportunity for freedom of speech. And on the other hand, people are having their media. I haven't actually been blocked fully yet, but some people are. People are blocked for expressing pro-Palestine views. People are having their YouTube channels cancelled, people are having PayPal shut down, or their bank accounts closed, or there's so many ways to attack us. And you're right, the disappearance of archive.org is a terrible thing. And we're going to see more of this coming with now artificial intelligence coming in, because of course it's what information artificial intelligence is allowed to divulge, which is the question. And in fact, there was an article by the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in The Guardian a few days ago, not long ago, in which he claimed to be a champion of press freedom. And he said in that it should be the corporate media organizations that decide the content of artificial intelligence. So that's, and that seems to be what the UK is going to be promoting worldwide. So we will have billionaire-controlled content of artificial intelligence. And it's very dangerous. We're actually at a very dangerous time. We're living in these dystopian times of control of your mind, control of what you are allowed to think, and control of the knowledge you can acquire to think with.
Yeah.
That's what
I was one of those people that got ethnically cleansed from virtual reality. Two years ago, there was a joint meeting between the American Congress, the Canadian Parliament, the Israeli Knesset, the British Parliament, the Australian Parliament, and the white parliamentarians in South Africa. And they brought the executives of all the social media companies, X and Meta, Google, TikTok, and ordered them to erase all my social media accounts, me and the Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran. So I mean, it's huge difference, but they erased all my accounts and kept the Ayatollah's accounts, So it seems like right now these governments, obviously, and these social media giants are in bed. We all know how many Israeli intelligence officers work in these companies, along with CIA and MI6 and others. And looking just at the laws that are now starting to be used and abused against citizens in the West, the cases that you mentioned, yourself including. There was a case in Canada this week that was about a Palestinian Muslim woman in a hijab that was demonstrating outside the parliament in Ottawa. And a Zionist lady grabbed her hijab and pulled it off. And he went to court. It's an assault, obviously, to touch anybody's. And the public prosecutor, the Canadian prosecutor, basically dropped the charges and threatened to charge the Palestinian Muslim woman with promotion of terrorism, because he said she was saying the words, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," that justified the physical assault of the Zionist, and that put that woman under suspicion of promotion of genocide. Imagine. So this is, I think all of these cases that we spoke about are kind of the smoke signals of what's to come. Do you think it's going to get worse?
Well, it is going to get worse. It is getting worse. It's getting worse every day. And it's going to continue to get worse. And there are new legislative provisions coming in. There are 3 new laws in the UK this year. There's a new law called there's a new National Security Act, which makes it illegal to accept money from any hostile foreign state. And the state decides what's a hostile foreign state. And that's going to, for example, make it, that will affect people. Personally, I speak to anybody. I'm happy to be here talking to you. Almost anybody who invites me, I will go along. I don't. It doesn't affect what I say. As far as I'm concerned, I'm responsible for my own words. So if I'm invited along by Russia Today or by China News or by anybody, I will go and tell them what I think. I believe in freedom of speech and in maximum dialogue between all kinds of people. But it's going to make a lot of that kind of activity illegal. There's an Online Safety Act where, and again, Keir Starmer has announced that is going to make misinformation criminal. Yeah. And of course, it's the government that decides what is true information, what is false information. So when the government comes up with absolutely crazy stories like the chemical weapons attack on Duma or the whole Skripal poisoning Salisbury, these official narratives, it will become illegal to say they are not true. It'll actually become a crime to oppose the official narrative, just as it's now a crime to say Hamas is not a terrorist organization. This criminalization of dissident thought and opinion itself. This is carrying on, and there's also a new Public Order Act, which reduces the bar. It says basically that the police can ban any gathering or demonstration if it inconveniences somebody. Well, any gathering or demonstration is going to inconvenience somebody. It lowers the bar so much to allow the police to ban demonstrations. So, and that's I just gave 3 examples that are happening within a 12-month period of new laws designed to help crack down. But I also want to tell you one happy story. I stood for election in Blackburn for George Galloway's Workers' Party. Fortunately, I wasn't elected, but because I'd hate to be in Parliament with all those horrible people. But I had windows like these windows you have here, big picture windows in my office, even bigger than these. And I had 10 foot high in the window, "From a river to the sea, Palestine will be free." And the night Julian Assange was released, Sky News called me and asked me to do live commentary on his appearance in Australia. So I sat there on Sky News for 30 minutes doing live commentary with "From a river to the sea, Palestine will be free" behind me in 10 foot high letters. And eventually somebody noticed at Sky News and all kinds of panic broke out. Sometimes we win small
victories. They didn't edit it out, did they? We saw a couple of last week or something, one of the contestants on Big Brother had a T-shirt that had the watermelon. She got touched up out of
This was going out live, so it was too late. By the time I noticed, it was too late. But I enjoyed that a lot. Yeah.
So there is clearly a lot of the supposed rights that citizens in Western countries, like the presumption of innocence, the right to know what accusations are against you, the right to retort against your accuser, all of these are being stripped away from people. The right to freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, freedom of association, and at the same time, the space that is still not fully controlled on the internet is getting really kind of tightened, the controls on it. We are right now remembering, today is the commemoration of the Balfour Declaration, when the UK decided to give the land of one people that they occupy to another people, the Palestinian land to the Zionist colonists from Europe. Do you feel that there's any possibility that ever the UK will pay amends for the Balfour Declaration and apologize for this crime?
Not for a long time. I think eventually that will come. There's starting to be a genuine reassessment of the imperialist legacy in the UK. When I was a young boy, people were still taught at school what a great thing the British Empire was. That was the narrative, that we brought, civilization to all these, brown people around the world who plainly would be very uncivilized unless white people taught them how to be civilized. And the fact, for example, that that at the time the British invaded and looted India, much of India was wealthier than the UK. Those things were never taught and never understood, and there was no means of finding that information. You couldn't find it in any book anywhere. Nobody had ever written it. That was not in the historical narrative. There's starting to be a change. There's a big change in the attitude as well. People understand the fundamental role of slavery in the empire and in the British economy. One step which has not been taken, and I think it's important is taken. You were absolutely correct in saying that the Balfour Declaration and the establishment of Israel was European colonial settler activity, because that's what it is. And it's very important to understand that Israel is an imperialist construct. That's what Israel is. It's an imperialist colonial settlement, and it must be seen. It's given this mystique, but actually it's no different to any of the rest of the British Empire, bluntly. And most of the worst conflicts in the world, if you look at, for example, the tribal conflicts in Kenya that caused quite a lot of problems there for decades, they're all to do
Amazonia region.
The Amazon region. But in Kenya, the British, because Kenya had farming land the British wanted for themselves, they forcibly ethnically cleansed tribes from Kenya onto the land of other tribes and caused conflicts that reverberate to this day. And most of the conflicts you hear of in Africa, in Rwanda, throughout, are caused by colonial boundaries and colonial forced movements of populations. So many of the problems of the developing world are imperialist legacies. And that it's very hard to get people in the West to face up to what they did and admit what they did and admit the exterminations they carried out. Try and get an American to admit to the extermination of the North American natives. That you get people who intellectually perhaps realize it, but they don't feel it, and very few of them feel the guilt they should feel. And Israel's no different to that. Israel is a typical European colonial settlement enterprise which relies on the extermination of the local people. And seeing it in that historical perspective is essential to ending it, because these all have to be ended. And Israel should be referred to the UN Committee on Decolonization. That's one area in the UN which isn't active and ought to be, which is a thought I've just had. In fact, it's come out of this conversation as a new area of activity to undertake.
Yeah, so those colonial borders that were drawn right around World War I and the end of World War I that include this Balfour Declaration definitely are a big cause of all the misery on this planet. And the liberation of Palestine and the end of the Zionist colony will for sure not only lead to the liberation of Palestine, but it will lead to the fall of the Sykes-Picot borders and most probably the unification of at least the greater Syria region. Much of the world, for it to get rid of that legacy of World War I, has to go through that same process. And here we have been frozen for 100 years in this moment of Sykes-Picot and the Balfour Declaration, and we haven't been able to move from it. You look at you spoke about the British public and starting to understand some of the history of the imperialism and what it caused. Do you feel that there's enough people right now in the UK that are taking that responsibility as citizenry? If their government is not willing to correct its mistakes, are British citizens now getting more active in that sense?
I think they are, but there's no genuine democracy in the West at all. Western democracy is a fake concept. The governments are controlled by the billionaire class, who also control the media, control the political parties, and control the individual politicians. And most of that billionaire class are ardent Zionists, which explains why we are where we are. And if you look at opinion polls on Israel-Palestine, often opinion polls ask quite complex questions. But if you look at the simplest questions, like, do you tend to support Israel or do you tend to support Palestine, the split on that is 84-16 in the UK at the moment. 84% tend to support Palestine, 16% tend to support Israel. And yet we have a government which 100% supports Israel and an opposition which 100% supports Israel. Plainly, you haven't got a democracy. There is no connection between the will of the people and what the politicians are doing. And partly that's ideology, and the ideology of the people who control the politicians, and partly it's cash. It's corruption, the enormous corruption of the Zionist lobby. So these things are difficult. But Palestine, and the terrible thing that's happened to the Palestinian people, is that you can't divorce it from the general question of imperialism in the world, of which it is a part. And you can't divorce it from the question of the power structures of the West. They're obviously, the Israeli military is really a branch of the Western military. Its weapons manufacturing is absolutely tied in to American, British, German weapons manufacturers. It flies American aircraft, it drops American bombs. It's all a part of the system where, firstly, the military-industrial complex in the West absorbs huge amounts of money and needs war and needs enemies as a reason to keep receiving all that money. And of course, the military and weapons industries are great for corruption, for politicians and kickbacks. That's just an extremely powerful lobby in the country, which has the ears and the pockets of politicians. And also you have the fact that there has been, it doesn't feel like it, but there has actually been, economic growth in the West over the last 20 years. There's been a total of about 40% increase in GDP in the West over the last 20 years, none of which has gone to the ordinary working people at all. That's 40% of the economy, which has all gone to the billionaires. Real wages have not risen significantly anywhere in the West over the last 20 years. The working man is no better off in real terms than he was 20 years ago. But we have got, as I'm sure everyone has noticed, suddenly we have people who have $80 billion or $70 billion. We suddenly have this rash of billionaires. There's been this massive increase in the wealth gap. And we have this massively wealthy class who run the place, who have a political class who are totally disconnected from the people, don't represent the people, and they realize that's an untenable situation, and they are panicking. What Israel is doing is panic. No, Israel is no longer tenable. Israel is not going to survive this. Israel, it's hard to give an exact timescale, but Israel's existence is marked. I expect to live longer than Israel. That's my expectation. And also that system of the vast and increasing inequality of wealth in Western world, that can't last either. And the West is panicking. The ruling class, they have lost control of the narrative. Nobody believes the lies of the IDF. The BBC can, all they want, talk rubbish about, Hezbollah command centers under every hospital or school. Nobody believes it. There's nobody in the West who believes that. There are some people who support Israel, that's 16% who support Israel, may pretend they believe it, but don't actually believe it. They're just making propaganda. But the vast majority of people are not taken in by it. They realize it's rubbish. That politicians, the political and ruling classes, have lost control of the narrative. That's why they're panicking. That's why they're trying to put people like me in jail. That's why they're trying to put Richard Medhurst in jail. That's why they're trying to put Asa Wilkinson in jail. They are panicking. These are panic measures. And this crazy Israeli attack, killing civilians all over the place. This is part of the same panic. It's an existential panic by the ruling classes of the West.
So Palestine and the media activism of the Palestinians on the ground and those who support Palestinian human rights around the world have destroyed the control of narrative that the Zionists enjoyed for a long time. And now, as you said, the elite in the West are panicking in general, as the Zionists in the colony are. And it's also exposing, in general, the separation between this ruling elite and the populace. Because, although it's very glaring on the issue of Palestine, the undemocratic decisions of the elected officials in the West, for the most part, they're also not giving their population what they need: health, education.
Exactly.
So there's no politician of any party, but this is the most glaring now example that is allowing people to either start revolting, and that's when we can start talking maybe about people that are taking action, because this is the only way forward. It seems like the politicians are not allowing the will of the people to manifest in elections and or in the decisions of the government. After a whole year of millions of people out in the UK, not one decision by the government represents those millions of people in the streets. So we see now people taking action in the form of Palestine Action, this group that is doing amazing work, physically shutting down the war machine that is supplying the UK, from the UK, the Israeli weapons manufacturers, Elbit and others. Do you feel that there is now a greater possibility of a return to militancy in the streets of the West, something of the 1960s, 70s kind?
I think we are going to see that. I think there's a massive gap, generational gap. I mean, those 16% that support Israel, basically nearly all old people who thankfully won't be with us too much longer. But sorry, I'm not very politically correct, Doctor.
You don't have to be politically correct here. We are not with Bill Maher, okay?
But and I think young people are getting it. A lot of that activism has gone into climate change activity, but I think that's a good gateway into the kind of political action that's necessary. And yes, Palestine Action are a wonderful group that I very strongly support, who actually go out there and smash up weapons factories. They smash up Israeli weapons factories. And they've started doing things like smashing up the companies that insure Israeli weapons factories and the companies that bank Israeli weapons factories. That kind of direct action is extremely powerful. And a lot of them are in jail. I mean, there are now, I don't know how many exactly, there are over 30 people who are in jail for one reason or another for their support for Palestine, including some Palestine Action supporters. One of the founders of Palestine Action were Richard and Huda, and I was with them a couple of weeks ago at the Old Bailey again. I seem to spend a lot of time seeing my friends in the Central Criminal Court. I was there where Richard faces charges of terrorism. Terrorism for trying to stop a genocide. If you try to stop the genocide, you are a terrorist. If you commit the genocide, somehow you're a good guy. This is utterly crazy. And Richard's trial itself will take place in Manchester on, I believe, the 14th of April. And I want everybody who's in the UK, who is listening to us today, to get there that day. I'm going to get there that day. And I want to see the biggest turnout there's ever been outside a trial there to support Richard in fighting these ludicrous accusations of terrorism when all they're trying to do is stop a genocide.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that we should go even further and follow suit with what happened with Assata Shakur and break out our prisoners, political prisoners and prisoners of war. But that's going to come soon, hopefully, this time. Look, the Palestine Action and their activities are inspiring a lot of youth in the West to become more militant. We saw yesterday, in the last few days actually, in Canada, a group of unidentified activists break into a military weapons manufacturer that produces the guidance systems in the F-35s. It's the only one, and they've destroyed their machinery. So now they can't resupply the F-35s with these guiding systems. Hopefully more people will take actions like this. And until now, these Samaritans are unnamed in Canada. So people can take action individually. They don't have to take a name. They don't have to be public about it. But it is the time of action now. It's not anymore the time of talk. You're looking at these suppressive actions by all these governments. And now you're here in Lebanon. We haven't touched Lebanon yet. It's your first visit here in Lebanon. Before I ask you about what you have seen, do you feel that when you go back to the UK, they're gonna try to maybe hold you again because of your visit here?
Almost certainly, I think. I would be very, very surprised if I'm not arrested at the airport as soon as I arrive back in the UK. I think they will try to say I'm here supporting Hezbollah, I'm here supporting Hamas, I'm part of the evil terrorist network.
They're going to clip that, and then, instead of saying, they're going to say, they're going to just say, I'm here too. They're going to clip that.
Doubtless they will. I should be very surprised if I'm not arrested again. I'm kind of prepared for that. I think we have to be. I think this genocide of Palestinians is going to be remembered historically. And I think everyone is going to have to answer for what they did to try to stop it. Everyone's going to be asked, what did you do? And if I didn't do anything, what could I say? That's why, I don't mind to get arrested. I don't want to be arrested, but I'm prepared to accept that. I don't want to be killed by an Israeli bomb in Beirut. But I accept that risk too, because when a genocide is happening, you have to try to stop it. That's actually international law. States have an obligation in international law, a legal duty to try to stop genocide, and yet they're fueling it. The West is fueling the genocide and not trying to stop it. Well, I don't care what my state is doing. I'm going to try to stop it. Now, obviously, I can't physically stop it, but what I can do is I can campaign. My campaigning reaches people, and hopefully we can get, we can get more of the kind of actions we talked about happening, and also we can get, eventually, we may reach a stage where there's a revolt and people overturn these terrible politicians. But we have to try, and there's a duty to do it whether we succeed or not.
Well, you are definitely delivering on your duties in your capacity, and much more can be done by the rest of society. Even during the Holocaust, there was German citizens, somewhat upwards of 70,000 of them, that carried arms against the Nazi regime. During slavery, there was John Brown and all the abolitionists that carried arms against the slavers. And unfortunately, up until now, we haven't seen one Israeli carry arms in 100 years of this genocide in Palestine, and since the Balfour Declaration and Zionism, we haven't seen one, unfortunately, Jewish person carry arms against the Zionists. And yet, we are yet to see any Western citizens, at least not since the 70s and the Red Armies, the German and Italian and Japanese citizens that came here and carried arms against Zionism, where I have a feeling that we're getting close to a return of that wave of armed militancy, even in the West. I would say you haven't had much time since you arrived here, but you visited a few locations. You didn't film them because you had no permits yet to film anything. The places that you visited that have been targeted by the Zionists, what's your impression about it?
Well, I visited, I think, about 9 different bomb sites, and I visited the evacuated suburb as well. I didn't see anything that wasn't, plainly civilian residents. You see the rubble of a bomb site, and you can tell what is in it. And it was furniture and beds and kitchenware and electrical goods, and of course, poignantly, children's clothing or toys. I saw absolutely nothing that indicated that anywhere that had been bombed was any kind of military target. And I was surprised by the scale of the devastation. It hadn't come home to me. There are areas where block after block are gone. And I've met people, I've met many people from the evacuated areas. I've met people whose homes have been destroyed. And I haven't, again, to say, I'm awaiting a permit to start filming and start journalistic work here. So I haven't been doing it as a journalist. I'll be doing it as a human rights activist. So I don't have film of this, and I haven't been seeking out to interview people. But you meet taxi drivers and waitresses and people, who live there and whose homes have been destroyed. And these are ordinary people, and they describe the areas they lived in as ordinary community areas. And I'm sorry, I'm terrible at names. I forget the name of the suburb.
The Dahir.
Dahir.
Yeah, which means just suburb, by the way.
Okay. Well, the West always described Dahir as a Hezbollah bastion, a Hezbollah stronghold, and they described the houses that have been destroyed as compounds. Just complete nonsense. It's actually a very nice suburb. It's actually quite classy, and it looks like some of the better areas of Marseille. That's what it reminds me of. If you dumped me there and I didn't know where I was, and blindfolded me, just put me there and took off the blindfold and said, "Where are you?" I'd look around. I would have guessed Marseille. That's what it looks like, and the notion that it's some kind of hive of revolutionary jihadist activity. It's complete utter nonsense. It may be just by chance of who I've been meeting, but not one of the women I have met who came from that suburb has been veiled, for example. I'm sure there are people there who wear a veil. It's a matter of choice, and I don't criticize people in any way for doing it. It's entirely up to people what they believe, and they should have the freedom to do what they want. But it's not the kind of community portrayed in the West. And I've learnt, in fact, that when you're there and you see the shops looking just like the shops in any nice suburb in the world, and you see toy shops and china shops and clothing shops, there's a lot of designer clothing shops, and a lot of cafes. And I'm learning, but it's an area known for its cafe culture and for its arts scene. This is the area that's being destroyed, and the portrayal of it is totally false. The portrayal of it is so false in the West that I myself, who pay attention to all kinds of sources, didn't know the things I've just told you until I went and learned. And that's why I have to be here, in a sense, to convey these kind of things to people in the West who have been given this totally false idea of the kind of communities where Israel is destroying people. They're dropping bombs, they're killing 20, 30 people, killing women and children, just anybody who happens to be there, just on ordinary blocks of flats. That's what is actually happening here.
Isn't it amazing the power of mass propaganda media, that even highly educated people like us would get sometimes affected by them, residuals of it. And you reminded me of my visit to Iran. I think of myself as a very worldly educated person, but I was shocked and even my expectations were tainted by the Orientalist propaganda, and what I saw there floored me, and I'm sure anyone that has this idea that axis of resistance countries are this, religious hellhole or something like that, will be shocked when they come to Lebanon. One last comment I will say about Hezbollah and their areas. In the south of Lebanon, there is Tyre or Sur, the beach town in the south that is being bombarded. It was the capital of the Phoenicians, one of the capitals of the Phoenicians. It is a Hezbollah town, but is also the only place in a public beach in Lebanon that you can drink alcohol on. People don't understand that Hezbollah does not force anybody into religious garb or religious behavior. And it's people choosing here in Lebanon how they want to exhibit their religiosity or not. It's amazing that this difference between what people have in their mind and what they find on the ground. Craig, when you go back to the UK and hopefully your detention will be temporary, what do you feel you can, through this work, through this visit, bring to the UK population?
I think an understanding of the humanity of the situation, an understanding of the people I've met, an understanding of their stories, a deeper understanding of Lebanon itself and the various factions and political factors here in Lebanon, which I'm coming to understand much more deeply than I ever did before. It's amazing how much you can learn in a week if you really set yourself to it. I don't pretend to be an expert yet, but I'm planning to stay a lot longer. But I want people to see the people who are being killed by the Zionists as people, not as figures of some foreign people who don't think like us and are different to us, and not as martyrs either. I want people to see them as real ordinary people with the same dreams, the same hopes, the same aspirations, and the same basic behaviors as everybody else. So I want to try to express humanity and a feeling of the importance of understanding the humanity of others. I think that's what I can bring by being here, and what, if you forgive my saying so, what my work is, what I'm actually quite good at doing, which is making people see the other side, the side they haven't been told before.
Craig Moray, thank you very much for being with us today. People can visit your website, craigmoray.org.uk. For more of your amazing journalism. We wish you, safe time here and safe time back home. You're still watching Wartime Cafe, our episode of this week. We hope you enjoyed it. You can visit our website, freepalestine.video, where you can donate and find all our socials. Until we see you next time, I bid you all a free Palestine.